The road is long, with many a winding turn, that leads us to who knows where. Who knows where?
Hello, my name is Anson Asaka. I'm the founder of New Possibilities. And today I'm going to continue the discussion about the Trayvon Martin case. Since the last time we talked, there have been 2 days of testimony. And for the purposes of this video, I'm going to concentrate primarily on July 5th, 2013. I'm going to focus on that day in the court. The most important thing that came out of yesterday's testimony was Sybrina Fulton's testimony. She testified that the voice that she heard on the 911 tape was Trayvon Martin's voice. That is very key, because that voice, if that voice is Trayvon Martin's voice, and I believe that it is Trayvon Martin's voice on that tape, if that is his voice, this is an open and shut case. And she established through her testimony that that was in fact Trayvon Martin's voice. Her testimony was genuine, it was sincere, and it was heartfelt. And almost as important as her recognizing that that was Trayvon Martin's voice on that 911 tape was just her dignified presentation. She, through her testimony, was able to destroy this image that the defense had painted of Trayvon Martin. They painted him as a thug. They depicted him as a gangster. They had him depicted as a marijuana smoking, gun toting gangster. And she shattered all of that through her testimony. She was well spoken. She established that she was educated. She's college educated. Her son also testified. He too recognized that that was Trayvon Martin's voice on the 911 tape. And that's very important. He too was well spoken, dignified, and his demeanor and her demeanor destroyed this idea that Trayvon Martin was raised by a pack of wolves and lived the life of a gangster. Basically, that's basically what the defense tried to depict when they released all of those images for public consumption. And through their testimony, through Trayvon Martin's mother's testimony and his brother's testimony, they destroyed all those stereotypes that the defense tried to paint. So their testimony was very important. Now, after the prosecution made their case, the defense presented their own witnesses to try to rebut Sybrina Fulton's testimony and Trayvon Martin's brother's testimony. But I think that they were unsuccessful in doing so. Those 2 witnesses did not come across as sincere as Trayvon Martin's mother and brother did. Not Trayvon Martin, but George Zimmerman's uncle testified that he first recognized the voice when he was listening to a news broadcast. He said that he was doing something else, like typing away on his computer, and he heard some screaming on the television from that 911 call. And he claims that he immediately recognized that voice as George Zimmerman's voice. I find that to be highly implausible for several reasons. First of all, whoever overheard him make those statements or whoever he talked to, they weren't there to testify yet. At least they haven't testified yet that they participated in that discussion. Or there's no one yet to confirm that that conversation actually took place. And perhaps they'll have someone there next week to confirm it. But at this point, there's no one to confirm that. And it just seems completely ridiculous that he would be doing something else and then he hears something on the television. He automatically recognizes that that's George Zimmerman's voice. So I don't lend much credibility to his statement. And I hope that the jury doesn't fall for the nonsense. And part of the reason why I really discredit his mother's statement, I'm talking about George Zimmerman's mother and George Zimmerman's uncle's statement, is because of George Zimmerman's own acknowledgement. As I said in the other tapes, George Zimmerman said when he heard the 911 call, that doesn't even sound like me. So George Zimmerman's own statement about that 911 call trumps anything that his parents or his relatives have to say about that 911 call. Because George Zimmerman should recognize his own voice more than anyone else should be able to. So for that reason, I doubt the testimony of George Zimmerman's mother and George Zimmerman's uncle. And I hope that the jury has sense enough to do the same. Also, yesterday, medical examiner Dr. Bao testified as well. Now, despite problems with his testimony, and I'll talk about the problems after I talk about the positives, there are some very important facts that Dr. Bao conveyed during his testimony. The first very important fact was the fact that he testified that Trayvon Martin would not have been able to move or talk after he was shot in the heart. That's very key because it contradicts George Zimmerman's testimony. George Zimmerman says that after Trayvon Martin was shot, that Trayvon Martin raised his hands up and said, "You got me." That contradicts the medical examiner's testimony. Also, the medical examiner talked about the pain and suffering that Trayvon Martin experienced. He said that Trayvon Martin could have lived between 1 and 10 minutes after the shooting. He said that Trayvon Martin would have been in severe pain and he would have been suffering, but he would have still been alive. Now that's very important because it tells us that Trayvon Martin was in a condition of pain and suffering in his last couple of minutes of life. And it tells us that that man, George Zimmerman, did a despicable act. We already know that he took a life, but he made this young man suffer for the last couple of seconds of his life. Also, this medical examiner testified that the only injury that Trayvon Martin had was a couple of very small abrasions on his left hand. A couple of small abrasions on his left hand. Yet, George Zimmerman claims that Trayvon Martin hit him between 20 and 30 times in the face. And Trayvon Martin's mother, Sybrina Fulton, testified that Trayvon Martin was right-handed, but yet there are no injuries to Trayvon Martin's right hand. That's very important. If Trayvon Martin was striking George Zimmerman in the face many times, there would have been more injuries to Trayvon Martin's hand. Also, it's very important to look at or listen to the first medical examiner's testimony. She testified that George Zimmerman's injuries were insignificant, that they were not consistent with George Zimmerman's account of being hit in the face multiple times. She also testified about the back injuries on his head. She testified that that injury could have only come from possibly one strike to the back of his head, or him hitting his head once on the concrete. That's not consistent with his story where he says that Trayvon Martin banged his head into the concrete multiple times. In fact, all George Zimmerman needed was a Band-Aid to take care of those wounds to the back of his head. They were so insignificant and minor. All George Zimmerman needed was a Band-Aid, and yet Trayvon Martin is dead. And he expects the jury to believe his story when it's inconsistent with the medical examiner's testimony. Also, it's very important that one of the witnesses who the defense probably thinks bolsters their case, this witness confirmed, he said, yes, at one point he saw Trayvon Martin. You know, he didn't say Trayvon Martin. He said the person with the dark jacket. He saw that person on top of the other person with the reddish jacket. Trayvon Martin had on a dark hoodie, and George Zimmerman had on, I think it was orange and black jacket. So this witness, who the defense would probably think favors their case, even acknowledged that he did not see Trayvon Martin hit or punch George Zimmerman. So again, you have another witness that makes statements that aren't consistent with George Zimmerman's story. Part of it is consistent in terms of him being on top of George Zimmerman, but in terms of the strikes and blows, there's no confirmation that that actually occurred. And actually, this witness testified that he did not see Trayvon Martin banging George Zimmerman's head into the concrete. He didn't see that at all. So again, George Zimmerman's testimony has been contradicted by the facts that have been presented. Now, the problem that I have with Dr. Bao's testimony is the fact that he didn't want to answer questions. It's like he came in there with a script and he stuck to his script, and he was going to say what he wanted to say regardless of what the questions were. He was going to say what he wanted to say regardless of what questions were posed to him. So in that sense, he was a problematic witness. And, you know, he did go back and forth. But again, you know, as I pointed out, he established some key facts that cannot and should not be ignored. Also, during the past couple of days, there was another key point that was raised during the trial. And that point is the fact that George Zimmerman attended classes where he learned about self-defense from a legal perspective. He learned about stand your ground. He learned about the nicknames for various, for self-defense, the legal nickname for self-defense. But yet, when he was questioned on the Sean Hannity show, he denied knowing about self-defense. This is crucial. He made direct misrepresentations during his interview with Sean Hannity. In fact, George Zimmerman received an A in this class that dealt with self-defense. So that completely undermines his credibility. And let's not forget that this case essentially rests on George Zimmerman's credibility. George Zimmerman claims that he was the one attacked. So it's his word against all the other evidence. And if his word isn't worth a damn, then his defense isn't worth a damn. And it's been proven over and over again that everything that this man has said, lots of what he has said, has been inconsistent with facts that have been presented during the trial. Everything from the injuries to the circumstances of the confrontation. George Zimmerman said that Trayvon Martin jumped out of the bushes and attacked him. And then later he changes his story and says that Trayvon Martin approached him from about 15 feet. And when he did the reenactment, it was plain to see for everyone that there were no bushes for Trayvon Martin to jump out of. And as the prosecution said, there are two people involved in this case. One of them is dead, that's Trayvon Martin, and the other one is a liar, and that's George Zimmerman. And I hope the jury considers all the facts. I hope that they are fair, and I hope that they consider the fact that this man has lied about many things. He's lied about many things, and his word is not to be believed or trusted. And with that, I'll say, let there be justice for Trayvon Martin.
But I am strong enough to carry him. He ain't heavy, he's my brother. So on we go.